Okay, so we're on a glossary episode where we're going to try and come to grips with these terms that get thrown around, like left, right, conservative, progressive, this sort of thing.
Yes.
So,
just to interrupt you, I would like to point out, welcome everybody to episode 10.
10?
Really? 10. This is number
For
10.
real?
For real.
Is it episode 10 or we have now reached 10 listeners?
No, this is episode 10. I think we're still at an even half dozen listeners.
Yeah, but that's because Gun Control took 7 episodes on its own. So.
Yeah, so welcome everyone. I am your host with a face for radio and a voice for print, Steve.
Yeah.
And then with me are Patty and Trent.
Okay, so
carry on.
So we're gonna try and come to terms, come to grips with them and get an understanding of these terms. But I thought I would throw the cat amongst the pigeons, and in my role as the S disturber here, are these terms useful? Ooh. Steve.
That's a very existential question.
It is.
You're letting Steve speak?
Absolutely.
That's very nice.
Just, because do you remember a couple of days ago, Rob Ford was doing something.
What's he doing?
And no.
No, that's what he was doing while Trudeau was enacting the Emergencies Act.
It was in regards to it, nothing controversial, because he was working with Trudeau. Huh. And it was a moment of intergovernmental cooperation. And Ford said, "Look, man, like I don't think these labels that are particularly useful. We're both on the same side here. We both want the right thing, or we both want the same thing. So we're just getting it done. That's it. That's all. So I'm gonna throw it out to you guys. Are these labels left, right, progressive, conservative? Are they useful?
Yes, and no.
I think they're becoming." Increasingly useless. I know that the text I sent, I think that was kind of the inspiration for this episode. I'm finding that given like the difference between like right and left in Canada and the United States have a relatively consistent definition, but as soon as you go to Europe, things get weird, right? What is conservative in Europe? Because they're conserving different things there than we're conserving here. So to say that
you've been
an Italian
you've been brushing up on your Sir Roger Scruton, I think.
Probably, I guess, but by accident.
By accident.
But
without even knowing it.
Without even knowing it, yes. Yeah.
Okay, go on. Yeah,
But yeah, like
to be conservative in Europe is a grab bag.
Yeah. So what an Italian conservative, because I can't remember the name of the lady who was just elected prime minister.
I couldn't tell you either.
But anyway, so what a right-wing Italian person thinks is worth conserving is much different from what a Republican, a standard small C conservative Republican, or a conservative in Canada is because in Canada or North America we find ourselves, the conservatives are now in the interesting position of trying to conserve liberalism, small L liberalism, which is just
classical liberalism,
classical small L liberalism, and that becomes really confusing when the Progressive Party is called the Liberals.
Yes,
and in the States, in the culture wars, the libertarians and small C conservatives and stuff like that are concerned with classical liberalism and the virtues of the Enlightenment and free speech and if the small C conservatives are any good, small government as well, but things like that, and freedom of speech and all those issues that help, I guess, Christendom to leave the Dark Ages and benefit from the Enlightenments. And
I'm sorry. Are you claiming responsibility for the Enlightenment from the right?
Yes.
No.
Yep.
We're claiming trying to protect the progress of the Enlightenment.
Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy.
Yeah. No, we're trying to claim. Brett Weinstein said this on a podcast a couple of years ago. He's like, the role of conservatives these days seems to be to protecting the progress of past progressives, and to a certain extent, he's true. I'm not for protecting the progress necessarily of FDR, but protecting the progress of Galileo and Copernicus and Jonas Salk and all those advancements, and Locke and Adam Smith
Hobbes,
and Hayek and Hayek. No, but
Heydrich.
Mises. Sorry,
Heydrich,
Mises.
Yeah.
Yeah, not
Yeah,
Heydrich.
the Austrian school.
Not Heydrich. Not Heydrich.
Not Heydrich. No.
Wrong Germanic name.
There's probably a decent Heydrich around somewhere, but it's too
Probably a
bad
couple
most
of
famous
them. Yeah, one or two.
There was on Mistaken Names, there was one of the podcasts I listened to was, and this is completely irrelevant, but this is Radio Free Digression, so.
Yeah.
They were talking about, there was a news report about the podcast was talking about the news report, and the reporter doing a typical leftist thing saying, well, how this person, it was a football player, and how he was being disadvantaged because he was black. But he wasn't black, he was Samoan. And so he had an interesting Samoan name, I can't remember his name. And it was like, and so they were laughing. It was a conservative podcast, and they were like mocking this reporter and saying, oh, the left, and now blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking to myself, well, the most famous Samoan in the world is a guy named Dwayne Johnson. So, this guy had a Pacific Islander name. The Rock does not, right? He's like, so, cut the chick some slack.
Yeah.
And now you can cancel us all because I just said chick.
Yep.
Yeah,
But anyway,
I got
left,
nowhere
right,
to go with that.
left, right. No, there's nowhere to go with it. It was a incomplete digression, but
No, it's all good.
Okay, so-
Radio Free Rabbit Hole.
So, free rabbit hole. So you were saying that they are useful, but not useful.
So my starting point to this would be that they're necessary. They're tools. And they are the tools that we need to be able to have any discourse, right? The challenge becomes, like any tool, it's who's wielding them and how well they are wielding them, right? And I think to our credit, this is why we're coming back for our second glossary episode, because we're going, okay, what is it we're actually meaning by this? If for no other reason to keep Patty and Trent from screaming at each other at minute 44 of the latest podcast. Because left is bad, no it's not, yes it is, no it's not. Right? And
and when you say left, you mean progressive, and when you say left, you mean Stalin.
Yeah, exactly.
Not necessarily.
But
Not
that's a lot of where the
necessarily.
arguments come from. Is
I think there's a lot of, like, when you say the left, there's a lot of different.
Well, we've
It's
had
a big tent.
So for context to the listeners, this is why I was really happy that this video of Jordan Peterson's came up randomly in my feed this week, because it discussed exactly that. And to me, I was astounded because I didn't even know, even though I respect a lot of his viewpoints, I didn't know that he actually saw a functional role
For the left.
yeah, within our society, as strongly as he did. And what he did was he very quickly dissected that between the radical left and the radical right are all these elements of left.
Well,
and
he said that they were there, but he didn't define them.
That wasn't the point. The point of the exercise at that time was he was starting from the viewpoint of the radical left and saying, okay, this is your starting point.
How do we know where we are?
You can't
on that
just
spectrum?
relegate someone to the radical right if they disagree with you, because there's all these shades of
Meaning
other
and intent in
things,
the middle.
including other lefts
Well,
between you and them, right? The other thing is, you and I had a brief exchange before we started this, where we kind of bandied about the concept of the left as an expression of diminished self-interest.
Yes, right, we did. Yes.
So I mean that to me is kind of when we talk about the progressivism of humanity over time, that to me is what that progressivism is. It's been a redefinition of our self-interest as including more people within it. So.
I would say that they are absolutely useful. That I'm gonna take the position that it's kind of neat how this worked out, and that you're kind of saying that they're really diminishing in use. You're kind of saying, well, they're a tool, and they have good points and bad points. I'm going to take that third position that says no, they are definitely, absolutely useful, and in fact, they are fundamental. They are absolutely necessary.
No, I agreed with you on the necessity.
Absolute necessity.
We have to agree on the definition, and which is what we're doing.
Well,
right? Because
this is hard, though.
If you're saying left is X, and I'm saying left is Y, and we can't come to any sort of agreement, then the term left is useless. Well, insofar as trying to achieve a discourse.
But so is the term right? Because I was just scrolling through trying to find the text I sent that kind of inspired this conversation. I said, look, I'm sick of being told that I'm a political bedfellow with Pinochet because we both like communism, right?
Right.
So I can understand how you would be sick of saying, well, you're a Stalinist or a Maoist, or being told you're a Stalinist or a Maoist, but don't say
Hang on. Let me check my T-shirt of the day.
Are you a Stalinist today?
Yeah, that's just Well, it is. It could be. There could be a silhouette of Che on there.
It is Che today.
Are you serious?
I could not find my Mackenzie Papineau T-shirt.
You're lying to me. You're not seriously wearing Che, are you? Get out of town! Shut the front door! Get out! I love it! Oh my God. We don't have anything like that. We don't have a great icon like that.
Yeah. I mean, you could probably make a fortune selling like Trump versions of that.
Well, I've seen ones that were ones with a Che, but instead of his face, it's a skull.
It's a skull.
Yeah, a skull. Yeah. Or to show representing the millions of people murdered in the name of that.
Yeah.
But or at least that's what I interpreted it as. But anyway, I will say that I do think there is often a deliberate obfuscation between these terms, these attempts to classify, because sometimes it may be in the interests of certain ideologues to defy classification or make classification difficult if they want to deceive as to what their true intent is.
Right. Well, that brings us all the way back to our best episode, the good faith episode.
Yes. Yeah, and it definitely ties into that. So let's start. Can we, just for, maybe taking, like walking before we run, let's talk about the divide between left and right. What does it mean? I mean, the origin was from the initial parliaments in France after 1789 of the French Revolution, where the radicals, the people who wanted rapid change within the social and political order, sat on the left of the assembly from the point of view of the speaker, and the people who wanted a more gradual change or certain things to not change at all were on the right. So this is the initial meaning was those who wanted rapid change on the left, those who wanted slower or no change at all were on the right.
Not to get too pedantic and go down too many rabbit holes. I'd always heard something similar, but it actually went back to at least medieval times, where if a king was sitting at a table on his right were his military advisors, on his left were
his spiritual advisors?
Spiritual, domestic,
economic.
I had not heard that. I had not heard that.
But potato sounds like, we're talking about essentially the same concept. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so that was the origin of it. So I'm going to throw the ball out there again. What do you guys think of the usefulness, the evolution of those terms? Where are we at today?
Well, okay. So when I was taught what I call the linear political spectrum.
Oh, yes. We should talk about the models in play.
Yeah, so that
Yes.
I know where this is already going,
Right.
and I've got something to say along
Yeah.
those lines when you're done.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, I think we've had this conversation before off mic, but, the linear political spectrum. And both ends are authoritarianism, but the middle's not anarchy.
Like the circular model,
No, the linear.
where it's
Left and right.
a single
You
line.
have, you have communism
Okay.
or Stalin, whatever.
Yep, yep.
Progressive
The
authoritarianism.
radical
one
left. Yep. And when we put Stalin at the far, far, far end of the radical
of
left,
left, and at
Yep.
the far, far end of the right,
we put Hitler.
we put Hitler.
Okay.
And to me, that makes no sense.
Isn't
But
that?
I mean,
Isn't that the circular? Like I've always I remember I was taught that as a circular model. So imagine a clock face.
see, I was never taught it as a circular model. I was always
Okay.
taught as kind of a linear one,
Yeah, that at 12 o'clock is the moderate.
right?
The guy in the very, very middle. And that at number 7 is Stalin, and at number 5 is Hitler.
And what's 6?
6 doesn't exist
Oh, okay.
because it was made circular to demonstrate. For those listening, I'm making these broad gestures with my fingers in
I think
the air.
it's closer to like 559 and 601.
That the idea being that both extremes of left and right have more in common with each other than they do with the moderates at 11, 12, and 1.
And I would agree certainly with that model more, right? Yeah, because I think they do. Like Hitler and Stalin came up with an agreement by which they started World War II. That because the thing with
the Molotov.
when Peterson says, "Oh, when the
you mean
the
like
radical
the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? Because Peterson said in that video, right, like where the radical right or the right wing extremists, started the war that killed 22 million people. But I'm like, well, excuse me, but the other radical on the other side half did it. They both invaded Poland at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And they agreed to divide it up.
Yeah.
And until one decided to shank the other, but they were working together, regardless of their feelings to each other. They were working together because
Well, so to expound on what you were saying, I don't know if you're finished, but I think I might be completing where you were going with this, because you're right. The linear model doesn't work,
no,
right? And the way it was first presented to me as an alternative was to look at them from economic system point of view as well as an authoritarian point of view. So at the one end of your left, let's look at left economically. So you got socialism on the far end, and I hesitate to say capitalism, but at the far right. But let's
a free market economy, shall we say, like an unregulated free market
not even necessarily. I mean, capitalism, free market economy might actually be the middle or somewhere else along the line. But for the moment, let's say socialism at one end, or let's say communism at one end, free market capitalism at the other, and then you've got libertarianism at the bottom, and you've got authoritarianism at the top, right? And that's where you start finding. So,
this is a model that it makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
And then maybe instead of being somewhere on the perimeter of that circle, you're somewhere in the middle,
yeah,
right? Like you define your position by an XY axis.
because again, I have a certain amount of opinions that are actually in line with Patty's, although we don't seem to find them a lot of the time.
That's not our job.
That's not our job.
This is not a good podcast if everyone agrees.
But Steve and you and I certainly agree on the libertarian side of things. And in fact, you said something very interesting, I don't know, about 10 minutes ago, about how about claiming from the right's point of view the protection of rights that had been gained by progressives in the past.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's certainly where the libertarian aspect of it, and you even went on to parse out certain things. So you were saying not necessarily the things that FDR achieved in the 30s, which we could put on the economic spectrum.
Yeah. Because as a libertarian, I'm against big government. So
Right? But you could towards the bottom of the libertarian, because that has certainly been a lot of the progression of that has been human progressiveness over the ages, has been more and more rights for more and more people.
Yeah.
All right.
I would say that I'm familiar broadly with three models. And there's the one we've talked about, like the clock face model. The moderate at 12, the radical left at 5, or the radical right at 5, the radical left at 7. Then there's the linear model, which has the radical left is not changed in this model. It doesn't bend. It's a straight, like a yardstick.
Right.
But this model places the Nazi on the left.
Ugh.
Yeah.
And the radical right is the anarchist.
I reject this also.
Well,
nobody wants to own
that's
the
understandable.
Nazis.
Yeah, nobody wants to own the Nazis.
I just think it's inaccurate to do.
Well, again, this is something we
There's
can
a lot
we
of-
can
we
we
can
can get
argue.
into
That's a whole
on
other
this,
podcast.
on this, or I think we can cover it on this one.
Okay, let's go.
Well, I mean, in good time, gents, in good time. But this model places the anarchist who wants no government, or an exceptionally granular government, as the extreme right winger. And this is, again, in opposition to the clock face model, which placed the anarchist on the left.
And again, yeah. But again, that model that you're describing makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, actually,
Yes.
it does,
Yeah.
because now we've put Hitler and Stalin
because
at
you're
the same end.
Well, it
at the same end
depends-
of a spectrum.
It depends on how you define. Again, what I threw out as the origin of right and left is one way. In other words, right and left as differentiated by rapidity of social change. That's one way to view it. But there are different ways to understand that. And I think that definition from 1789 is not where we are now, certainly not post-20th century. But again, that's a second model that I'm familiar with, where
I
it
think-
is the linear model.
I think what you've done is you've just extracted one of the previous axes that we were talking about in the two-axis model and flipped it horizontally. And you've taken your clock face and you've just put the two hands pointing in one of the directions.
Yeah,
Right?
well, yeah. It's
So-
that linear, what I call the linear model, as opposed to the clock face model, uses a different lens to
Absolutely.
view political
Well, it's
philosophy.
It's
Right?
I would put it the metaphor is actually it's a different yardstick. The original one that Steve mentioned was a yardstick measuring left as communism, so arguably a political economic system, and the far right was Hitler,
Was
is
fascism.
fascism,
Which is National Socialism. Yeah.
which is also arguably a political economic model.
Yes.
Right? What you just discussed was two separate axes, one of which is what we had discussed as our vertical axis, which is authoritarianism versus individualism. You know, and the interesting concept is, okay, which is left, which is right, right? And let's just table that concept for a second, right? And then there's the whole concept of left versus right as purely economic concepts. Socialism versus communism at one end and capitalism at the other.
Well,
for example,
that's the third model I'm
Exactly.
familiar with, which breaks them into two separate axes.
Yeah.
Where you have I'll call it, say, the x-axis, which is economic.
Yeah.
And then the y-axis, which is
authoritarian versus-
or social.
Right. Yeah.
And so then the idea being that you are in a quadrant.
Right.
That you could be economically, in terms of economic policy, you could say, well, I don't see a big role for the state. But in terms of social policy, I see a very active role for the state, and say the so-called social conservative. And then you could say, well, I see a very active role for the state in regulation and control and planning of the economy, but I desire a minimalist role for the state in terms of social policy, in terms of like who may marry, or help me out. Like say reproductive. Well, no, that's not it. But say like in terms of what we consider the moral concerns, right?
A state where the state sets a kind of a moral
yeah.
Moral.
And so that way you could say, that was in a different quadrant altogether, where you're technically. Where it's saying that it's trying to acknowledge the idea that you could be, finger quotes, left in terms of economics, but not really in terms of social policy. I'm not a fan of this model. I don't advocate for it at all. I'm simply saying it exists and it has a constituency.
I think it's, again, from the point of view of the tools that we want to use, it becomes one of the best map models that we have for being able to ascribe the terms that we're discussing.
What don't you like about it? Because to me, that's a model that I think has a lot going for it.
I think it's again, it depends on what you think is the most useful differentiator between these two concepts. So let's go with this model. Let's go to the 0 point.
Right.
The very, very meeting of both axes.
Right. This is a person who believes in a significant amount, but not a total government control of the economy, but in a significant...
Let's back it up even further from that. This person doesn't know what they believe. They have not yet made an opinion.
Then how are they in the middle? How can you put them anywhere in the...
What question do you ask?
Well, I mean, if zero
somewhere,
if 0 is your quadrant, right? That means you have none of these opinions,
and that's basically impossible.
I'd like to actually throw a monkey wrench into this concept here, because I think one of the other concepts we've been known to bang our heads against as well is the concept of government. Whereas I don't argue for the need for government. What I see more so is there's a distinction. If we were to take the y-axis in this case, and instead of having government at the top, we have the collective.
Like we're talking about, this is the economic or
no,
this
this is the social.
This is the social axis,
right?
Right, of course.
So let's have we have the individualism at the bottom, and at the top we have concern for the collective, right? And however we define that collective, it's going to be a social construct. It's whatever society we're living in, right? And so along that scale, I would say that government, effective as it may or may not be, and we don't have to have that argument right now, is merely a representation of the level of where we are on that scale, right? Do we concern ourselves only about the individual? How much do we care about other people around us, our society, and how large a society do we define ourselves as? Ourselves, our families, our village, our tribe,
to the nation,
state, nation, internationally.
Yep.
Right.
Or even somewhere between nation and international.
Yeah.
Because like we talk about the nation state.
Yeah.
But we have multinational states.
Yeah.
Or
you've got the European Union, you've got NATO, you've got
say within I'll say Germany, for example. We have the German people, but we also have large Dutch and Danish minorities. We have a very small but existing Sorbic minority.
Sorbic?
Yeah, the Zorben. They're actually a Slavic people that have existed in Germany since...
Wow. Okay, cool.
Since
you heard it here first, folks, because I certainly did.
Yep, they're a very, very, very tiny minority.
Yeah.
They like Eastern Germany, kind of really close to
more.
Poland.
Yes,
because they would have been held over because there was like that.
Yep.
Prior to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in between being dominated by the Russians,
the
Ukrainians.
They were an independent kind of tribal entity that was incorporated into the concept of Germania,
Yeah.
Now, someone who's a more authoritarian expert on history may correct me on this.
I think you meant authoritative.
Sorry, yes, authoritative.
Oh, they could be authoritarian.
Yeah.
Especially on German history, right? Like, exactly.
It's the German history! Yeah. But when the Teutonic expansions, the eastward expansion of Christianity, that is when these people became kind of incorporated into the political entities that would later become Austria, Germany, this sort of thing. So they go back that far in modern, like what is now Brandenburg, but they exist. You know what? While you're talking, I'm gonna look them up and I'm gonna get a number for you, like as to actual like population.
Okay. But I mean, I think all I had done was I'd thrown the monkey wrench in saying, okay, instead of having government at the top, let's just call it the collective. And the government, big or small, is just one way of approaching how we see the collective as important. I'm not sure.
Isn't the collective, because here's a term that's become, in the modern era, kind of useless, and that's anarchist.
Yes.
Because the anarchists who like protested against the world or the World Economic Forum or whoever was in Seattle back in the 90s, those people are not what I understand an actual anarchist to be, right? Like to me, an anarchist is ultimately the ultimate expression of a libertarian, and they believe in no government and they believe only in the individual.
Okay, before you go any further,
yes,
let's just throw this out there. The Sorbs. 1,000 people in Poland, about 2,000 in the Czech Republic, and as of a 2007 estimate, 60,000 of them in Germany. Oh. Holy cats! 20,000 of whom still speak the Sorbic language.
Wow.
So there you go. Okay, sorry, carry on.
In a country of, 45 million people?
Yeah, about that.
It's more than that, isn't it?
Or 60, 65?
I thought
still.
I thought West Germany was 60.
Any way you slice it, that's pretty good to still retain. I mean,
for a minority, that's essentially 80,000 or 90,000 people.
Yeah, in a polity of like 60 million, like a cultural juggernaut that is Germany, to still exist. That's pretty good.
Yeah, someone should point that out to Quebec, maybe, huh? Or should that be another episode?
Probably.
Yeah. Anyway, go on. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, because Patty raised earlier with one of the one-axis models that anarchist was on the right.
Right. It was considered the furthest example of the right.
And it was like the clock model. Both authoritarian governments were on the far left. Right, so now we're talking about that collective political axis, right?
Right.
So, but I think both left and right would claim anarchy in their own way, and they have done.
Okay, so
I don't know how the left claims anarchy.
Yeah, well, let's go back to our models. The linear model, I would say, and I'm gonna. I admit
is that linear model with anarchy on the right? Is that your personal favorite?
Yes, I subscribe to that.
Because I could work with that model. I like that.
Well, it's easier for me to understand.
Yeah.
In that, again, remember I asked you on the quadrant model? Mm-hmm. If somebody is at dead zero because they don't know yet, they haven't really thought about it. And so we've got to place them on either the X or the Y. That means we have to ask them a question.
Right.
Well, what do you think about X? The question we ask goes a long way to deciding, or let me rephrase. The question we think is appropriate to ask to understand this person's thoughts goes a long way to deciding what model you think is more appropriate.
Absolutely.
So for me, the linear model is appropriate because I think the definitive question is, with whom does sovereignty lie? The group or the individual?
Okay, but I'm going to argue at this point that we have to use the two-axis model, the four quadrants, because it doesn't matter what we want, right? I think we've already pretty fairly and clearly defined that there are at least two ways of looking at the concept of left and right, and they are not interchangeable. One is political.
no.
One is anarchist versus collective. The other is socialism versus capitalism.
Controlled economy versus
Yeah.
Right.
unplanned
Yeah, once one
Right.
it separates political questions from economic questions.
Right. But the terms left and right are used interchangeably on both those axes. And that's why we have to look at these models.
I don't know about that.
No, we
Can you
do-
give me
we
an
do
example?
know that.
What do you mean how left and right are used interchangeably? Like, do you mean to represent the same thing?
No.
Oh,
I mean that they're used on
that's what I thought you
they're
meant.
used on the political axis.
Yes,
and
and
they're
they're
also
used
used
on
on
the-
the economic
Yes.
axis. Where, as we've already determined, there can be a left libertarian and a right libertarian. Which means
Dane, I
which
would really
means-
disagree with that.
Which
I
means-
don't think you can have a left libertarian. I don't think you can.
do.
I don't think you can.
Like within the movement.
How?
Well, because people.
Well, okay, again,
'Cause people
this
come to
is my
libertarian-
bias. I'm saying that the definitive question is, with whom does sovereignty lie?
Yeah.
right.
What
So
what is an alternate question?
here's the thing. Okay, so you got this hypothetical society.
Yeah.
It's made up of X amount of people. Who cares?
Yeah.
Right? And there are some less fortunate people within them.
Yeah.
Right? And it's a libertarian society. Everyone's doing their own thing.
Yeah.
Right? And someone says to everyone else who isn't at the bottom of the society,
Yeah.
says, hey, what do you think about, everyone throws in $5, we take care of these people at the bottom, right? No pressure, do what you like, right?
Yeah.
We're going to take care of those people at the bottom. A bunch of us are getting together and we
Yeah.
want to do this.
We're going to take up a collection.
Are you in or
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
Right? You can say yes, you can say no. There are no repercussions to
Yeah.
doing so. That is left libertarian. As a really crass example.
What makes it left?
Because, well, again, from
'Cause
the
it's
economic point of view, it's a redistribution of wealth.
But
Right?
it's voluntary.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a voluntary redistribution
So
of
then
wealth.
why can't that be right?
Because redistribution of wealth is, in some people's view, a leftist concept.
No, that's a leftist concept of a right concept. To the rightist, again, going from my bias of with whom does sovereignty lie,
Yeah.
right-wing economic policy is voluntary exchange.
Yeah.
So the key point is voluntary. What I would say, in order to make that left, it would have to be mandatory. Like, in other words, if we're going to do that through taxation, that would be the big difference. Like, so, okay, the end goal is we're going to help these people at the bottom one way or the other. Okay, that's the end state. We got two ways to do this. We can do this with a voluntary collection, and if let's say we got 100 people in our pyramid. Okay, we got 200 people at the bottom, 100 people in the middle, 10 people at the top.
Yeah.
And the 100 people in the middle. Actually, no, we're going to say the 100 people and the 10 people at the top. These 110 people say, okay, look, we're going to help these 200 guys at the bottom.
Yeah.
And we're going to go by your initial model.
Yeah.
And we're going to say, okay, it's voluntary. If you want to do this, do it. And if only 3 people in that middle tier decide to kick in, and they only kick in $2 each, well, then that's the way it is.
Yeah.
If we change that up and say, no. If we're going to help these 200 people at the bottom, we've got to get serious about this. We're going to make a tax. And everybody is going to pay $2 a month out of their
Yeah.
accounts.
Yeah.
Everybody. And we're going to help these people. Okay, it's not optional. You can't opt out of it. This is a tax. It's a tax, people. Come on.
Okay.
That to me would be more of a left-wing concept.
All right. So I'm processing this. I'm not going to disagree with this. My knee-jerk reaction is like, fuck off. But no, I mean, it's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
So now I'm having to go back into my fundamentals
Yeah.
and kind of go, okay, is this a valid statement? Right?
Now, that's not to say that right-wing individuals could not necessarily see the validity of it or the utility, not validity, poor word, the utility of it. Because again, you're going to be really hard-pressed going to the linear model. you're going to be really hard pressed to find anyone other than the extreme right-winger, hardcore anarchist who says, yeah, we don't need taxes. We don't need the state.
That's one. So that's going to be one of my statements in the response, right? But here's going to be, because we're getting into some very complex conversations at that point, right? My simplistic response to that is, and this is kind of where I typically see the right reaction to the left in terms of
redistribution. Like to you, that's kind of like our fundamental question.
Kind of. That's kind of what we're debating in this moment, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, I'm saying redistribution of wealth can be anything, right? And you're saying it's exclusively a concept of...
No.
It's exclusively a concept of the right unless it's government.
But there's a... I mean, because what you described...
It's not really what I
mean. Is fundamentally is charity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. If you make it voluntary...
If it's voluntary, it's charity. If it's taxation...
It's mandatory.
It's mandatory.
Right. So, but what seemed to become the question...
So charity is non-governmental, but taxation is very governmental.
Yeah. And one is you can opt out.
Yeah.
The other, you can't.
Right, which was my original point.
Yeah.
But the question seems to have become whether or not the redistribution of wealth, which I profess to be a left economic concept, you are stating in response to that redistribution of wealth is only a left concept from a government point of view.
From the standpoint of it being involuntary.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It is only left when it becomes mandatory.
See, that's... I so want to refute that out of hand, but I'm still processing that.
Yeah.
Right?
Just that sometimes, if we're going to make decisions on the basis of the group, okay, my favorite rhetorical tool for this is from popular culture, from Star Trek. There's a famous line in there where Spock says to Kirk, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one or the few.
Right.
So I think if you... I'm being devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not trying to say this is what I believe. I'm trying to say this is a school of thought.
Yeah.
If you are in that school of thought, then you accept that there are times when your individual preferences must be subordinate to the betterment of the group.
Well, and that's
right?
always going to be
and that is
massive,
to me a foundational concept within the left. So to say that that something is that what defines it as left makes its mandatory nature is not necessarily a statement saying, "Oh, look at those evil people." No, it's just a way of understanding that it's a necessary compromise.
Okay.
In our social interactions.
I'm going to answer this, and I'm not at all sure going into this is going to come out the way I think it's going to come out.
We're throwing darts, basically, right? And let's see where it takes us.
So I'm going to present the left-right concept in terms of the redistribution of wealth, and it's going to I'm going to try and do it simplistically, using a historical example, and I suspect it's going to get a bit more complex from there. But again, using my view of left and right, but something that shouldn't be seen as left, but how the right, the extreme right, can view the left. It was in El Salvador back in the 80s or early 90s at the latest, and a group of nuns were executed by a government death squad. And that group of nuns was traveling through El Salvador to aid the impoverished, right? And so they were seen as a left target by the right-wing government.
What was the term? What was the term for a branch of the Catholic Church in Latin America that was very politically active and very, very left? It's not social gospel. That's a Canadian term. Help me out. Liberation theology. That's what I'm thinking of.
I'm not going to argue that these
Yeah.
were or were not because I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Right. But in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
right, this was, kind of one of the most benign aspects of the Catholic Church and religion
Mm-hmm.
in general, to be going out and doing quote unquote good.
Yeah,
Right. For
a genuine charitable mission.
Right. For the impoverished of El Salvador.
Yeah.
Now, where it gets kind of complicated, I'm going to say, well, they were probably there for some way to provide food,
Medical care, perhaps.
health,
Yeah.
some essentially social programs.
Yeah.
Right. Non-governmental, charitable. Right. But this was perceived as left from the extreme right. You know what I mean? Now, what could, and here I'm speaking devil's advocate, is what begins to muddy the waters at this point is that, well, the rightness, the right wingness of that reaction is from a hierarchical point of view, from the point of view of rights, and so the individual rights of those peasants were also being impacted by this. And are inextricably linked to their economic well-being.
So,
right?
Is there a convention or understand? And again, I'm asking for your opinion on this, and so this is going to necessitate a bit of speculation on your part because you can't know the thoughts of others. But in your view, is there at least a certain school of thought on the left that the right opposes social work, like the idea of assistance to the poor?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't speak very
Why?
well, but I think
Why? Like again,
some people
calling
don't
a bit of speculation on your part, but in that doctrinaire school of thought amongst the left, like if someone said, well, the right opposes this. And then, so like, say if you're explaining to a child and a child would say, well, why?
Yeah.
What is the response within that school of thought?
within that school of thought, why?
Like, why would the right oppose social work?
I think there are, and these are going to be extreme elements of the right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it's like you will have seen in Latin America from the 80s backwards, as will have been seen in Spain. It's keep them in their place, mm-hmm. right? Don't want them getting any ideas, right? They exist solely as a labor force, and they're eminently replaceable. They're gonna keep pumping out puppies and just keep feeding the industrial mill, right? There's no need for social work, right? Mm-hmm. They are where they belong. They're there for a reason, and it's basically a superiority complex. Just justifying an existence. Mm-hmm. They're there for me, right? And that is the way things are, and that's the way mm-hmm. things are meant to be, and that's the way they need to stay.
And do you think that explanation was fairly widespread amongst the left community?
Oh,
or was more of a radical view?
I can't speak to.
Yeah, I know. I'm asking you to speculate.
It's going to be context, but I think you will find that what happened in Russia in 1917, mm-hmm. probably a lot of that going on.
No. What right? I mean, what I'm asking
likewise
is,
in Cuba in 1959.
I'm not asking you how many people had that point of view. Mm-hmm. I'm asking you how many people on the left believed other people had that point of view. Was it widespread, or was it, say, more of a hardcore?
I can't even begin to answer that. I think it'll depend on which people, at which period in history, mm-hmm. looking at which situation. So that's kind of what I was trying to answer. Mm-hmm. That there will have been people on the left, mm-hmm. Either experiencing it in Russia at the time or experiencing it in Cuba at the time, or people outside of Russia and Cuba looking in from outside, seeing that in the Russian and Cuban governments respectively.
I wanna ask you guys. I want to take a step back and I want to ask you a question again. Like where I said my first question. If guys at ground zero, I said, well, I don't know what I think.
Yeah.
I need a question to determine their thoughts, and that question for me was, with whom does sovereignty lie, group or individual? What are your first questions?
What do you think of Trump?
Okay. Now, what are you trying to suss out when you ask that?
I think ultimately, and I think this addresses the individual versus collective. But maybe we need a third and fourth axis on here. I don't even know where we get the fourth one, or where we fit it in here.
So, what would your third axis be?
I don't know, some sort of ethical, right? Because there's a certain amount of ethics going in here. So I joked, what do you think of Trump? But what am I looking for, right? What I'm looking for is, what do you respect? What do you respect in the rest of humanity?
So
what do you respect outside of yourself?
What are the polar opposites then? On that question, what are the two far ends? Because the ends are always very easy to define. Well, it's when we get to the middle that's hard. So let's start at the extremes.
We have actually hit upon a third axis here, and it's an ethical one.
Okay. So what are the extremes?
Because, well, at the one end, you've got the anarchist. Well, because the anarchist is in this case kind of the middle point.
The anarchist, the anarchist doesn't really talk about ethics. The anarchist just says there should be no overriding authority beyond the community level.
No, I disagree, and this is why. All right.
Okay.
Donald Trump, from what I've observed, is a very, very self-interested person. He doesn't really give a shit that, and he's more or less said as much. He doesn't give a shit about anyone else but himself. He sees everyone else in the world, every single other human being on this planet, through the sole lens of his self-interest.
Okay.
All right. I do not see that in my professed libertarian friend sitting across the table from me. All right. I know that he is somewhere, I'm not exactly sure where, on a scale that I have not yet defined, that otherwise has Donald J. Trump at one end of it.
So on one end, we'd have extreme self-interest.
Extreme, like absolutely exclusive self-interest.
Yeah. So like we're on the Love Boat hits an iceberg.
I'm the first one on the...
Or Donald grabs a lifeboat and just goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I need legroom.
It doesn't even cross his mind. It just doesn't even cross his mind.
I'm out of here.
There's room. Yeah,
thank God I'm going to be in this lifeboat. These supplies got to hold out.
I'm in danger.
No, I think what you said. I need to get out of here quickly.
From danger.
But boy, thank God I got out of there
without any thought that there's room for other people in this boat. It just it's not that. Yeah, I'm saying I'm talking in moral terms. It's not that he thinks F these other guys. It just doesn't occur to him.
Yeah. Well, I okay, maybe that's a fifth axis.
So
I don't know.
What's the exact
I think we're talking about like. I think we're talking about an axis that at one end is like sociopath, complete sociopath, and at the other,
would that not be a complete sociopath?
Oh yeah, absolutely, right. So you'd say Trump, maybe.
Yep. But I'm removing him as a euphemism.
That's the example he uses. But it's a. Because I don't know,
so who would be the opposite?
But Trump is a narcissist, not necessarily a sociopath.
Well, yeah, but
okay, but if there's sociopathic elements, so maybe it's a psychological scale, and ethics are tied to that. I don't know. The other end
would be the other end.
The other end is a complete empath.
Who
probably doesn't exist.
Give me
Mother Teresa.
That's who I could think of.
Someone who it seems to me that we've been hearing some scandals about her recently too, so we can strike her off the saints list.
Well, I mean, the other side would be the Mother Teresa,
Jesus Christ,
who says,
"You're going to accept the Christian model."
Hey,
well, it depends on
watch your
which
language.
Christian model. Yeah.
But yeah, the other side is this for lack of a better term, Gandhian Mother Teresa kind of figure, who says, "I will not get on a lifeboat until I am certain that everybody else is on a lifeboat."
Yeah.
I guess.
That's
Or,
How does
so
that-
is,
Using the
is your
example.
model is your model like the sociopath who takes off the lifeboat by himself, or the responsible, dedicated captain who's the last man off the sinking ship?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. But again, I don't know where this axis that we're like this ethical axis. I don't know where this fits in.
It goes through the same point zero.
Why is it useful?
Now you can, because we're talking about the anarchist, right?
Yeah, but the anarchist isn't an ethical stance.
As a concept. No, we've already determined that there's an anarchist at one end of at least one axis, right? Possibly as part of a two-axis quadrant. So we've defined that, right? Now,
Okay, hold on. So on the quadrant model,
yes,
where is the anarchist?
I think we put him at the bottom and then government is at the top.
Right. So the anarchist is
Authoritarian-
at the very.
Okay.
So if I look,
just
The
in
anarchist is
case
the bottom
anyone's
of the
getting
wall.
any negative ideas, let's flip this around. The
top of the
The
vertical axis is
the anarchist. No, it's the anarchist. At the bottom is government or collective, depending on how we're choosing to
Okay,
define
so
it.
the bottom of the vertical axis is group.
Yes.
The top is individual.
Yes.
Okay. So on the vertical axis, where's the anarchist?
He's at the top.
Is at the top. On the economic axis, where the this end of the room, like say the
So he's not at the
your
top.
right hand side of the room is individual.
Actually, yeah.
Or group?
Because he's not at the top. He's in the far right corner.
Yeah,
Because
he'd have to be in the far corner.
If we're putting the free market at the right, the unregulated free market at the right, and the completely planned economy at the far left,
Yeah.
the anarchist is at the top right corner.
Yeah, he'd have because he wants no external authority on social issues. And he wants no external authority on economic issues.
Yeah.
I believe
Mm-hmm.
that we have not determined that the right gets exclusive claim to anarchy. And I am going to insist that for the moment he remains at the top of the center of the axis.
No.
Hang on. How do you define the
Now-
anarchist? Because I think you and I define an anarchist as
Different
someone
government.
who desires no external authority.
Yes.
No external authority. Okay.
So how
that's
do
fine.
you define anarchist?
I think
I can go with that.
I think we're going with problem with, for the purposes of our model that we're trying to make here, that
Yeah.
the left and right of our models shouldn't be the same as the left and right as we talk about them and pull out. So for the purposes of this portion of the discussion, throw the left and right out of the window. Other than, we'll call it port and starboard just so we can get through the conversation. How's
Yes.
that?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So
top, bottom, port, starboard.
yeah,
Yes.
or fore and aft.
Fore and aft.
If we want to go completely,
I'm with you. Yes.
Right?
Fore and
Anarchist
aft.
is for the collective is aft.
Okay, hold on. The individual is for, the collective is aft. The
planned economy is port.
The collective is port. The
Unregulated market economy is starboard.
The planned economy. Don't go mixing. Collective is bottom.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Planned
you can't
is
make-
aft.
Yeah.
Planned
Or
economy
planned regulated economy
is port.
is port. The laissez-faire unregulated economy is starboard. Okay. So
Okay,
where?
so far so good.
So
well, we just
what-
determined. So you have returned the anarchist to my requested place, which is at 4.
No,
Yeah. Also, the bow. What? Sorry.
that's the bow. Yeah,
Yeah, the bow.
he's not staying at the top of the bow. He's
He's
on the
in
port-
the corner.
He's on
yeah.
the starboard quarter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Starboard quarter.
So-
yeah. Goddamn, boys.
What-
Some
what
dumb
we
infantry
find-
guys are learning stuff.
Okay,
today.
so you've just made a distinction between individualism and anarchism. Is that correct?
No, we're trying to use the two synonymously.
Okay, because you've now put the anarchist.
Well, just to say
Temporarily-
that the anarchist, because like you said, the anarchist doesn't want outside interference.
Right. That's the way we see the anarchist.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So
My-
that's
my
why we put him
argument-
out in the starboard quarter.
Okay, my argument is that there's something at the top that isn't big government and isn't the collective, and which is at starboard or at astern. So at the bow, we've got what? The individual.
That's the individual.
Yeah, individual.
Okay, the
Yep.
individual.
Yep.
So we're making a distinction between individual and anarchist, and I'm going to allow that as a placeholder on the starboard quarter, starboard bow for now.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Okay. What I'm going to argue at this point is that you guys have suborned the concept of anarchy, apparently because you're still claiming that anything left economic has to necessarily be
Authoritarian.
a planned economy and authoritarian.
Yeah.
And I dispute
That-
that. So
in
I'm going
order,
to take
like-
it back. Port is no longer,
Okay.
I no longer agree to port being planned economy.
Okay. What would you call port then?
What were we calling it? We were calling it, charity was one possible interpretation of the far left. So it was redistribution of wealth. That's what we were talking about. Redistribution of wealth. That's
What would the
That's your
polar
port.
opposite? So if port is redistribution of wealth, what do you see starboard?
free market economy.
How is that the opposite of redistribution of wealth?
That's a very
Because the
interesting
free market
question.
economy is how wealth is created, not what is done with
and
wealth.
how it is distributed. So I mean,
Okay, hold on. Let's go with that. Go with
no,
that.
I find this is a very
Okay.
interesting way of.
So
what-
if port is maybe not redistribution of wealth, but the control of wealth. The
no, because
holding of
then
wealth.
then I'm feeding into your argument that justifies the anarchist being at the top right, and I don't agree with that.
If port is redistribution of wealth, then the right is not right. Sorry. Starboard is okay. Now you said free market economy. I said that's how wealth is created, and then you said, but that's also how it's distributed.
Yeah, but it's just under a free market economy
What's a
with no
term
controls.
for that? Distribution of wealth. That who creates it keeps it?
He who creates it certainly decides who keeps it.
As compared to the
I mean,
port,
you-
where is a mandatory redistribution.
No, not necessarily. Where it's and that's
How can that work?
No, here's the problem.
Yeah.
We're trying to define the extremes.
Yeah.
And you're trying to inject gradients into the extremes. Well, we need to.
No,
we need to establish the extremes.
Yeah.
first.
no. We are disagreeing.
How can
We are
how can
disagreeing
redistribution
on the-
of wealth not be mandatory?
Because it can be
if you
voluntary.
Make it, if it's voluntary, that means someone has the right to opt out.
Yes.
And say, no, you're not redistributing my wealth.
Exactly.
That can't exist on the extreme port.
Yes,
It could
can.
exist in the middle,
Well, see,
but
and
it
so
can't exist on the far standing with your heels on the gunwale, leaning over the side of the boat, holding onto a rope.
I believe it's pronounced gunnel. Not that I just sound like a Navy boy, but
I'm going to take your word for it because I'm just a dumb gravel tag. Yeah, so if he's like leaning over the edge of the boat, he leans back and his long flowing locks dip into the water. That's
Okay.
how far over the port side this guy is.
so
That is, he's got to be mandatory.
Yeah, it's got to be mandatory.
'Cause that's
Otherwise,
what we're
it's
talking-
meaningless, right?
no.
Because then everyone could opt out.
Okay. Right. So I think we've hit on our logjam, our roadblock, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the fundamental point upon which we appear to
I think you just
Disagree.
really dislike the idea of it being mandatory.
because I don't see it as mandatory.
There's nothing wrong with it being mandatory. Certain things have to be mandatory.
Well, you know what?
They
That's,
have to be.
That's a taxation conversation, and we're going to set that aside.
Or
for
just
now.
social behavior, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because I mean, certain things have to be mandatory,
Yeah.
like we drive on the right side of the road.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, exactly. So set
Yeah.
laws and taxes and all that shit aside for a sec, all right?
Okay.
We've hit upon a fundamental principle that we seem to be at odds.
Discord, at odds.
At odds about.
Yeah.
Okay? Because I hear you guys presenting to me that redistribution of wealth on the left,
If we're at the
Hang
most
on.
extreme position.
on the redistribution of wealth
Yeah.
as a concept on the left has to be mandatory. What I'm arguing,
No, that's not what we're saying.
that's what I hear you say.
No. What we're saying is that at the most extreme end, not the
Yeah.
moderate left.
No, I'm
Not
saying on the left.
I mean the most
Sorry.
extreme position, which is only theoretically possible and cannot exist in real life. It's only a theoretical marker in the same way that 100% anarchism cannot exist.
I fucked up because
extreme left,
I
it
used
has
the
to be
term
mandatory.
left when I meant port.
Port.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay.
These are
So-
habits that are hard to break.
At the extreme port,
Yeah, extreme port side.
I hear you guys saying at extreme port,
Yeah.
redistribution of wealth can only be mandatory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm saying I disagree with that.
Why?
But there's no reason an anarchist,
Yeah. Otherwise, we
Or
can't differentiate
the person-
port from starboard.
the free market guy, like just because the extreme starboard guy who has all the wealth, creates all the wealth, and keeps all the wealth, can't decide on his own to establish charity, that doesn't move him off the extreme
Right.
starboard, right? Because it's voluntary.
Yeah.
Well, we have hit upon a fundamental disagreement
So,
as
so
to
maybe
What I'm-
your ethical access goes from the port aft quadrant to the starboard fore quadrant, and
No.
that's why the anarchist ends up in that corner.
I'm saying an anarchist can be at your off your port bow.
In the port quarter, an anarchist, no,
Yes.
because
How? Because the
Because remember, the far port,
Yeah.
the far port is not voluntary. It's
That's-
involuntary.
No, that's why I'm disagreeing.
Okay.
You cannot call the far port. You cannot define it. This is
got-
what I'm arguing.
you gotta help me out a
guys.
little
Okay, let me try it this way. The far port is mandatory.
It is not.
It has
Or
to be.
It is not.
or no, that's not what we originally said, was it? That the we're on the economic axis, right?
We're on the
We're on the
economic.
economic
Okay,
axis.
so we said the far port was
What we originally said was the controlled command economy.
yeah, and then we changed that to distribution of
You
wealth.
changed that. And
I
we're arguing.
quickly
We're
disputed
still
it, yeah.
arguing your
Yeah.
change.
You
This is what
wanted
this
it
whole
to go-
conversation
yeah.
is. Us
You
arguing
wanted
that
it to
change.
go to distribution of wealth, and so then we said, okay, that would make the starboard side voluntary, or the person
No.
who creates the wealth decides what to do with the wealth.
Yes.
So then on port, who decides what to do with the wealth?
Oh my God.
How would we answer that? If starboard is the creator of the wealth decides,
Okay, hang on. Let me
it could
catch.
be
let me
anybody
catch
other
up.
than the creator. Who would it be?
No, on the starboard.
And I'm not criticizing. I'm asking for clarity.
Okay, on the starboard.
Yeah.
Valid questions, right? Because I do see this. I do genuinely, sincerely feel this, that redistribution of wealth in the form of charity belongs on the far left and is voluntary. It is not mandatory, right?
Okay.
So extreme port does not mean mandatory.
It means a desire or a recognition of the value of charity or assistance to our fellows.
Exactly.
So then what would the extreme right be?
Well, and that's where
God, I did it again. What would the extreme starboard
well,
be?
the extreme starboard, and I don't want to paint it this way, right? Like I'm trying not.
No, this
to,
is we're just trying to we're trying to make theoretical models here. That's all. We're not
trying
assigning
to-
values.
I'm trying to present the extreme port as a possible as having a potential voluntary aspect to it, in terms of the redistribution of wealth, using charity as an example, and previously called socialism, communism, whatever you want to call it. All right. At the far end,
But what's
we've been at the far starboard.
Side.
We've been presenting free market capitalism.
Okay.
Right. But I'm not trying to paint free market capitalism as a result of this argument, even though I feel that the extreme port definition is valid. I'm not trying to paint extreme market capitalism as inherently greedy. All right. We've got models of economic systems at either end, but I'm arguing that the one can be voluntary.
Okay. So, again, theoretical exercise here. The dead middle of the boat
Yeah.
is zero value.
Okay.
The extreme port
Hole in the bottom of the boat. Got it.
is 5.
Okay.
Extreme starboard is -5. Who is at +2 and who is at -2?
Oh, I think we're still working on our extremes right now, and frankly, not doing a great job of it.
Yeah, because I'm having a really hard time. Okay, then again, like I'm having a really hard time understanding where you're at. Could
Well,
we go back to how do you define the anarchist?
Okay.
Because I think that's part of it. Steve and I say it is the guy who's recognized no external authority.
Exactly. And
Everything that
for
individual
the
does
record-
must be voluntary.
For the record,
Okay.
I can work with that.
Okay.
All right.
So then how
can
can
work with
that
that definition.
individual not be on the extreme starboard bow?
We come back to whether or not, and this is our disagreement right now.
Yeah. Whether or not anything on
I have not
port or
convinced
stern-
you, and you haven't convinced
Yeah.
me, but you guys seem to be insistent
Yeah.
that anything to the left of the axis has to be increasing degrees. So a port
Yeah. Yeah.
is increasing degrees of mandatory
Yeah.
activity,
yes.
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah,
I
I'm asked it.
I am arguing in my 4.4 quadrant
Okay.
2-axis model, there is a place on the left,
On the port.
a port
On the port side.
that is voluntary.
So
Sure.
you're saying that
So I'm saying-
consensus that
But not at the
pure
extreme.
you're saying that pure consensus
Yeah,
can be
it's-
reached voluntarily.
Yeah.
At
See,
the far port.
I think you guys are trying to have your cake and eat it too. All right.
I don't know, man.
I
right.
think no.
That's
I
kinda
would
difficult.
think
No.
I think
No,
you're pulling the
because-
typical leftist model of accusing me of what's actually true of you.
Well, no.
Yeah. This is confession by
Okay.
projection.
How do you guys get authoritarianism at both ends? That's fucked.
What do you mean? At both
Well, we
ends?
don't get. Well, in the model we're trying to build, there is
Yeah.
authoritarians in.
We see authoritarian at the port side.
right. If the anarchist
and
bow.
astern.
if the
Yeah.
no. If the anarchist lives at starboard 4,
Yep.
right?
No, he doesn't. He lives at
In our model, in Patty's and my model,
in our conceptualization. Yeah.
if not yours, if the
Yeah.
anarchist lives at
Starboard bow.
or starboard bow,
yeah.
the authoritarian lives at the port stern.
Yes. And you know what? Let's try.
I refute
If
that.
we didn't want to
That's-
use loaded language, in our post-Enlightenment world, we consider the authoritarian as a negative term.
Yes.
So if we were selling this, what word could we use? What we're trying to express on port and stern is someone who is a collectivist,
Yes.
where they
believe in the power and the efficacy of government
as a problem solver,
as a problem solver.
but that's a mechanism.
right.
And again, I'm going to try, and
So they
I'm being
believe-
devil's advocate here.
Yeah,
Okay.
I understand.
So it's someone who wants the betterment of the group. That the individual. Just give us a sec, brother. Oh, we got a problem with the tech.
No, I want you to pause.
Huh?
Oh, calling for a timeout.
And we're back from that break.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we were talking about our model where our anarchist,
Yeah.
for Patty and me, and Trent does not agree with this. He's
Right.
He's vehement in his disagreeal.
I was saying if we wanted to try and take the least loaded language we possibly could,
Right.
where we say port and bow are someone who, or are positions that view the betterment of the group as the non-negotiable value, that the group must take
No,
priority.
that's aft.
Yes,
The group is aft.
Port and aft.
Right. Yeah.
No, but
I think port is on economic
I think
issues.
he's-
Aft is on social issues.
So, and I think this is where we've hit the logjam, right? And this is why I
Or
say
this
you
is
guys,
what you're taking dispute with.
yeah, you guys. This is why I say you guys are trying to have your cake and eat it too, by putting authoritarianism at two ends, at two of the four ends. And I'm saying, well, that's not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is that one is an economic model, and one is a political model, or a social model.
Yeah, social model.
right?
Yeah.
And
So you're saying we're not able to divorce the social from the economic, is what you're trying to say.
Well, I think that's in my mind, my approach to this is that the whole point of the exercise is to have these two axes separate. Like you're not meant to join them except within the quadrants, right?
Right.
Because I do sincerely believe
Okay.
that there can be a voluntary.
Port and stern
No, the stern is authoritarian
on
There's no
social
question.
issues.
On the social, it's the collective / government / authoritarian. At the bottom, it's the anarchist at the top, or the individual. Let's say the individual,
individual at
because
the top.
the anarchism and the anarchist bit is kind of confusing things.
So the individual.
The individual is purely individualism, and stern is collectivism.
Sure, and
My friend
Yeah.
Sean, who I often CC when I'm emailing you,
Yeah.
he is vehement on this point to reject the terms left and right completely.
Yeah.
And to him, we should talk in terms of individualism or collectivism.
Right.
well, but again, there's political models and there's economic models, and I think they can be. They are separate, right? And that's part of the problem. Left and right is used to do the two things when really, left and right are kind of at least. Yeah, they're on two separate axes. So you can be left, right, left, right. According to the
I'm
common
asking
terms.
you to explain how that can be.
Well, that's the whole point of. That was my understanding of what we were doing with this axis. Right?
Because
I will maintain.
we've got a definition of the port side, which is a collectivist concept of economic activity.
I appreciate that. I think what you're trying to say is that we're not able to divorce the collectivist portion from that
authoritarianism.
from that economic portion,
Or
to
not
separate.
authoritarianism.
Well, no, and see that's
mandatoriness.
and that's why I think there might be a third axis that we need to define here because
But we're still trying to figure out what is port. What is hardcore port?
Can I?
So I think-
What is hardcore storyboard then?
I said extreme individualism.
No, that's the bow.
That's same thing on all economic matters. Extreme starboard
and that's
is the laissez-faire.
I think what
No,
Trent's
what's-
trying to get at here is that we got to divorce. We have to actually divorce. That you and I are not able of divorcing the axes from them completely.
Okay,
Right? I think that's Trent's problem.
I'm gonna suggest something, and I think
I
you're
would
right.
say he's right.
Okay, can you say that again?
That
I'm
we
not sure I
need-
follow you.
So the social axis,
Yeah.
or bow stern,
Yeah.
right? We're layering the social axis onto our economic axis because it's
Confusing these.
It's confused. Our viewpoints, our priors, whatever, are unable to divorce the two, right?
Okay.
So we're talking the bow stern, right?
Okay.
Individualism versus
collectivism.
Collectivism involves coercion or mandate.
In our view, but not in Trent's.
Right.
Well, no, but we're talking extremes here.
Yeah.
Still,
Remember, we're
you and I have that convention. He does not share that
but
conviction.
I think you can agree with this. Talking exclusively about Stern, not
Yes.
getting rid.
Okay, so we're in agreement. Okay.
Exclusively about Stern, that there is going to be coercion. There's going to be the individual at the bottom,
Or-
at the stern. There's going to be coercion
Can
or
I
mandate,
say
mandatory
Yes.
subordination of the individual will to the group?
to the group, right?
Okay.
Well, actually, I'm actually going to suggest at this point to take the group, the collective, off of the axis, at least
Off
temporarily.
of the bow-stern axis.
Yes.
Off of both, because I
forehead.
feel it's actually.
Well, I think that's
part
what
of
you're
the
saying is that
confusion, right?
that the two of us are unable to take that. To
Well,
separate
no,
those two.
and I think I've
That political from the economic.
contributed to this. So I'm going to suggest taking collective out of it. So let us just put the individual at bow
Mm-hmm.
and authoritarianism at stern.
Okay.
All right. Now let's get to the economics. Right. The economic model. And I am sincerely trying to work with you guys on this.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Maybe it's okay. So we're saying free market capitalism on the right,
Or
starboard.
Yeah.
And a port, we've got, I don't know what I'm trying to say, social welfare. Maybe this is where the
And
collective
again,
comes
you're
in.
trying to use redistribution of wealth as your
Well, I
medium.
think you
this
you are
axis.
actually holding me very much accountable to what I actually mean. What does Trent actually see
Yeah.
as the economic port?
Yeah, like what
Right?
what is this port starboard axis measuring?
Because I see it as voluntary. And we've talked about this sort of kind of in the past, in that what I see as left libertarianism, right? It's and so I guess what when you really boil it down to what I'm trying to say is there can be a concern for the collective and a commitment to that collective that is purely voluntary on an ongoing basis. It's a personal commitment.
You just really, really have a real difficulty with associating port with authoritarianism. This really just strikes you as wrong.
Okay, and there's
You're really uncomfortable with that.
there's two layers of that, right? One is I feel that genuinely feel that the authoritarian aspect is down at the bottom,
But that's the social.
right?
We're talking
Hang
about
on.
economics.
That's the social, but
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Authoritarianism is a social construct, and it belongs on that axis.
Yeah.
And when I'm talking about the horizontal axis
Of economics.
axis of
Commercial
economics,
life.
and maybe we need to be calling it something else. I don't know, but right now that's what we're calling it. I'm not trying to be difficult here. I'm not trying to evade the issue.
No.
I am trying to decide what it is. It's if we got free market economy on a starboard, a port, what we're talking about is some version of distribution of wealth, concern for the collective, ethics that do not necessarily unto themselves
Require mandatory participation.
exactly right. There is a part, and I think charity is the closest obvious thing I've come to that, right? But
Can I say something that's really inflammatory?
Well, I've heard you say such things, so I'm going to bet you can.
Do you remember at the beginning of this conversation when I deliberately asked, are these labels useful?
Yeah.
And I took the contrarian position, a third position that said they are because people who reject these labels are seeking to deceive and obfuscate.
Well, okay, I'm hoping the inflammation that you're talking about isn't about accusing me of trying to deceive and obfuscate.
Not you personally. Not you
Okay.
personally at all. But I think this is part of it in that I think that some people on the left are genuinely, utterly decent people, who are good,
Why?
honest people. Not honest. Who are good.
Not honest?
No, well, honest is a different thing, right? It's not about whether they lie or don't lie.
Okay, so when you say not
It's like
honest, you're not saying we're not honest. You're saying I don't mean to
empathetic.
use that word.
Yeah, they're exactly. Yeah. They're lying bastards. No, they're empathetic.
They're genuine.
They are genuinely wanting to help people to be
in good
people.
faith?
Yes, they are acting in good faith.
Right?
We
They're sincere.
we appreciate you saying these
Are
things. Man.
deeply troubled by going down this same path that we have gone down and seeing at the port side end of the boat a mandatory conclusion, a mandatory, forceful, coercive, authoritarian. They're deeply troubled by this.
Well,
and so they recoil and they say, no, this can't be right. This can't work. What I'm talking about is helpful, charitable, based out of humanitarian concern. This doesn't sit well with me, that it necessitates a coerciveness. Like when you got some jerk like me on the starboard side saying, look, you can't escape it. When Marx said dictatorship of the proletariat, that's what he meant. This is you, own it, wear it, accept it for who you are. And they say, no, that can't be right.
Okay, so
And so then that's, I think, a big part of our confusion over left and right.
okay, so here's the inflammatory bit that I took is that you said, well, not me personally, that I'm
Not you.
that I'm not these things, but at the same time, you do seem to be implying that. Yeah, poor old Trent, he's over there. He's been brainwashed since fuck knows when, and he's just having trouble getting out of this box, right? Poor guy, right? And I'm
Ladies
going
and
to
gentlemen, Trent's Eureka moment.
Oh, jeez.
I am taking what you were saying very much to heart, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm not convinced by what you were saying.
Yeah, you're not agreeing with it.
I have not found the words, and this is the challenge you've presented me, and it's and I thank you for it. Actually, it is very, very. It is hugely a challenge. It's really forcing me to consider what it is that we are talking about here. But I still don't see it as being an anathema to suggest that there can be a social, because what we're really trying to define on the far port is I'm not sure
what is it?
What is it? What we used to call economic left, right? And I still feel vigorously that it does not, by its definition, have to be mandatory, which is
Coercive, mandatory,
which is point of view that you're presenting,
which is what we're presenting,
right? So I think, and this is where I'm going to get really philosophical and psychological and sociological, I guess, is the combination of those two concepts. But is that there can be, maybe it comes down to a societal level of how how that society is and how individuals will operate within it, and what are the social norms within that group, right? That say, okay, this is how we define how we care for all of us and people outside of us and people below us, right? And that is how we are raised. So therefore, is that coercion? Is it not? But this is a social construct. As a society, we say these things. And you grow up as an individual and you, I guess for lack of a better term, you buy into these things because this is the only way you know. Right? Now, as an individual, if you participate in that taking care of the social welfare of as many people as as your social group is defined. Now we're getting to a real gray area of what coercion is and what coercion isn't. What is the individual, what isn't, right? I'm sorry, I apologize to you guys and the listeners, that's as close as I can come to kind of defining what I'm trying to express the port bow quadrant to be.
Yeah. You just...
And that's
you
why
you just cannot make peace with it being a coercive place.
But that doesn't mean that it is a coercive place.
That's what I mean. You cannot accept that. You're not going to.
Can I try?
You're not prepared to make that convention.
Can I try something different?
Yep.
Can we look at port and starboard through the lens of property? So.
Okay, go on.
I had two different kind of ideas just pop in my head, and so I think Patty's and my conception of both axes. There's a common link between both axes, and that is the maximalization. Is that a word?
Okay.
Of choice, be it social or economic, between the individual and the collective. And that is common to both axes, I think, in Patty's and my conception. So using property on the economic axis. The far starboard is no collective property. All property is individual. All choice of what to do with that property is individual. On the far port, all property is owned by the collective. All decisions about what to do with that property
Are
collective, not individual. So the individual, so the choice is common. This is a thing that we can't separate between our social axis and our economic axis.
Yeah.
That I think you're trying to get us to strip off, that we're not able to in our conceptual models.
And the reverse is true.
Choice.
I cannot do the same. Now, I'm not going to argue that yours is valid, but I'm not going to say that mine is either.
Right.
Like
right. We're just
at
saying
this point,
it's a different way of looking at the world.
and that's why I've been calling it the logjam, right? And it's I actually find this fascinating that we've actually, if nothing else, we've managed to boil it down to this difference in our viewpoints. That I can see some sort of, I'm going to return to the word left, economic left, or any, in fact, apparently, to the gentleman across the table, any left is authoritarian anyways. Doesn't matter which axis it's on. And that was the realization I came to halfway through this conversation.
Under our conceptualization.
Yes.
Doesn't mean that's the way it is. That's the way that Steve and I think of it.
And conversely, that's
not the way you think of it.
I'm coming at thinking that
There's got to be a different way.
hard port can be voluntary.
Right.
In fact, that is whether it's voluntary or not depends on where on the individual authoritarian axis is. So I don't think we're going to solve that today.
Well, no, I don't think we can. I mean, again, we have fundamentally different ways of looking at the world.
Yeah.
The best we can do. Oh my God! Did those just break?
These have been.
They did about. He was doing that about an hour ago.
They break.
Okay. Wow.
In case you guys didn't realize, this is something I found out recently, that if you there are muscles on the side of your head,
that's kind of what I thought.
And if they move, they can make your glasses fall.
I just thought that you were so hard in thought, you just broke your glasses. So under your reframing of the port starboard axis as a question of property, and you're saying, okay, like where the question we ask.
I mean, it's just one aspect of the economics, but I feel like it's
a
the
thought
best
model.
Yeah,
It's a way to look at this.
Yeah.
Could the operative question that pushes you to port or starboard be how decisions are made when there are disagreements? Or would that be more the bow starboard axis? Or is it both?
Again,
is it a useful question for both?
Right? This is why I say choice.
Yeah,
the choice.
I don't really
is the thing that we can't strip off that axis.
This is why I personally don't think the quadrant model is particularly helpful.
Right.
Because I think it's just I think it just adds confusion.
It certainly can't if you can't define one of the axes. So,
but we can.
We did. We can.
We can.
Right?
We have a very functional definition for our needs.
I've been outvoted, folks. That's how democracy works. So,
but again, that just because democracy doesn't necessarily mean truth, right?
Yeah.
You know, like the famous critique of democracy, right? Is, well, if Steve and I vote to beat you up and take your money, well, that's democratic.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it right. If Steve and I vote that
two wolves and a sheep deciding what to have for lunch.
Or exactly as Lincoln said, or if Steve and I vote that this table will now be known as a chair, that doesn't mean it's true. It just means we voted on it. It means it's democratic. It doesn't mean it was true.
I appreciate you saying that. Here's what I'm going to propose. I'm going to propose we wrap this up right away here because
we might have to do a part 2 on this.
Well, we are. In fact, I'm going to propose a part 2.
Because we haven't even touched progressive and conservative.
So I'm going to take your last point, Steve, about redefining the x-axis as being
the
property
based. You mean the port starboard axis?
Starboard.
Gotcha.
So that's going to be the property model, and so I'm going to ruminate on that.
Okay.
And I think this actually provides a good lead-in for something we've danced around a number of times along the way, and we've touched on it today, and I think is very relevant to exactly what you just said, as well as the larger concept, which is law, tax, government, right? And because it's quite obvious to me from an individualistic point of view, all of these things are, all of these things are essentially bad because they are all coercive. At no level are any of those free from coercion, right?
It's almost a motto at Reason Magazine that even though taxation is necessary, taxation is still theft.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I don't know if I would use the word bad, but they are coercive.
They are coercive. Yes.
There are coercion can be for good ends.
All right.
Yeah.
So that there's thank you for that.
Be.
No, thank you for pointing that out because I've been feeling very much on the defensive by the use of the term.
I'm going to say coercion is not necessarily always negative.
Well,
Steve's example was we all got to drive on the right side of the road.
Or the thing, it all falls apart.
Yeah, exactly. Now, maybe I think driving on the left is better. Doesn't matter, guys. We got to find a way to work together here. Some things have to be mandatory.
Yes.
Cool.
So there you go.
So at that. That's what I'd like our starting point to be. So, okay, so let's.
I just want to say that. I mean, we've. Sorry to make you feel you're in a sensitive, but we've been trying. I mean, this argument has just been trying to define the extremes, and we're not talking. We haven't started talking about the middle at all. We're just trying to define the extremes.
And I'm not trying to say that port is better than starboard or bow is better than stern. That's not my intention at all.
No,
I'm simply trying to say what is port,
and that was the fundamental for changing it. To port and starboard, fore and aft, from left to right.
To try and take the loaded language off of it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So with that in mind, no apology necessary. It's actually been a very amazing conversation and a very enlightening one, personally. Right? I think it's important. So, no. Like I said, I just had another epiphany when Patty said, not all coercion is bad. And I've been on the defensive because I've been feeling that...
Yeah.
As the token portist in the room, and coercion's been ascribed to port the whole way along, and I've been fighting it because I'm trying to say that it's not. But so I think that's
part of the thing is like there's going to be coercion to the starboard, right? Because the only absence of coercion is right out
extreme starboard,
right?
That's right.
Yep. And so we're getting more coercion as soon as you're in off the gunwale. With your dreadlocks hanging in the water, there's gonna be a little
bit of a certain amount of coercion,
right? So 0 on XY axis is half coercion.
So that's
it's a question of how much coercion you feel is acceptable.
Right? Because, like I say, I describe myself as a minarchist libertarian because I don't want to have arguments about how to privatize the sidewalks. Right? So, anarchists are busy, I'm going to build my sidewalk 13 inches off the street.
It's my own damn sidewalk.
And 2 inches wide off the front of the building. And I'm going to build mine 4 feet wide and 6 inches off the street. Right?
Because I can.
Because I can.
Yeah. And because you have
it's my right to do so.
Yeah.
Right.
You have no right to tell me how to build my sidewalk.
Well, then, I think you're right. We've been stuck on trying to define the extremes without realizing that, okay,
none of us are at the extremes. The extremes don't exist.
Well, not only
it's
that,
a theoretical model.
The whole concept of coercion. Yeah, it's fucking everywhere. So I think that's perfect. Taxation, government, law, and the meaning of coercion.
Understand what you're dealing with inside the boat until you first understand those extremes.
Where the edges of the boat are. Yeah, the ends of the boat.
Where the edges of the boat are.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, let's start with the extremes because they're easier to conceptually understand. No one really sits there. No one rides in the boat, leaning outside. What'd you call it? The gunnel?
The gunnel, yeah.
No one does that. We all sit in the boat.
Yeah.
But the extremes are easier to conceptually think about. And we use that as a starting point for further discovery.
Cool.
The one thing I would like to leave us with
Okay.
is something just to keep in mind in the background, in that a lot of our discussions have always been focused on the idea of, in a lot of ways, I'm always pushing you for specificity. I'm always trying to pin you down on something, and you're saying, no. It's that's not the way it is. It's not so black and white. There's nuance here. I think that's going to come further into play as we explore more these concepts of labels. What does it mean to say left? What does it mean to say right? What does it mean to say progressive? What does it mean to say conservative? This idea of specificity or non-specificity, I think, is going to play into that. So I would just like to throw that out as a reminder. Let's just kind of keep that hovering, near the ceiling of the room as we go further in these discussions.
Absolutely.
All right.
Steve, we leave you the floor.
All righty. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Hopefully it wasn't too boring because it was actually tremendously interesting for us.
Oh, it absolutely
And we are going to flog this dead mule again one more time as we try and come away from the extremes.
One more time.
As we try and come away from the extremes and talk about real life.
Yeah, something useful.
Yeah.
Taxes.
Yeah.
If you have any comments, please mail us at complicatedpod@gmail.com. If you could like and share and subscribe, and please, and like I say, share. Emphasis on share. Share is one important one. And you can find us on the big 3 podcast apps: Google, Apple, and Spotify. And send me an email if you want me to go to a lesser podcast app like Spreaker or SoundCloud or one of those other ones that nobody's on. So I don't waste my time posting there. And other than that, have a good one. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.